you're seeing in terms of vaccine hesitant parents. You just mentioned you've had this conversation already twice today.
Yes, exactly. We're seeing a larger number of families for whom vaccination is intimidating and sometimes a little bit frightening. What that means for us is that even though most parents really want their children to be vaccinated, sometimes they're not quite sure how and when.
Okay.
So I would say when I talk to parents who are getting ready to have a child or who are coming to me as a new patient, I'm seeing probably maybe 5 to 10% of families who are really anxious about vaccine. So we never vaccinate casually anymore. I like for everybody who's going to give something to their child to know what it's all about and why are they doing that.
I told you before, I talked to some parents who said they've been kicked out of their doctor's
Right.
offices. Do you treat patients whose parents opt not to vaccinate?
Well, we have to be a little bit flexible. The Academy of Pediatrics, which is my parent organization, has really made a statement saying we should be talking and in conversation with families like this for the main purpose that with better education, many families actually choose to get their child at least partially vaccinated, which is better than not vaccinated at all.
Okay.
So, most practices of pediatrics and some of family practice in this city will pretty much say if you're not intending to follow the exact standard schedule, you should leave the practice. And I think that's a bit narrow minded, but it saves a lot of conversations and sometimes some arguments.
Okay. But you're not in that vein. You believe in talking about it.
Well, this is it's case by case.
Sure.
If someone's truly not interested in their child's future enough to neglect the child's vaccines, which are an invisible seatbelt we put on our child that you can't get once the child has the illness, then we need to part company because their interest in their child's future maybe doesn't match my desire for the vision for their child's future. So, but if there's more of fear factor or an uncertainty that maybe I can help with, I'm certainly happy to talk with those families.
What are the main concerns they've brought to you? You've mentioned fear. You've mentioned they're just kind of uncertain. Are they hearing from other parents? Are they reading books? Like, what kind of things are driving this hesitancy?
Well, there's this sort of grassroots anxiety. I think every play group or family, distant family relations has somebody who's not doing their vaccines on the standard schedule. There's a lot of sources of misinformation in the internet. There are books written about alternative vaccine schedules which have no validation and really aren't recommended by anybody official, but have gotten out and sold a lot of copies. And so they have many fans that want to spread the word that it would be okay to do something way later than it's needed or do something way slower than it's needed. A lot of concern comes about how many vaccines are given to a child at the same time, and is the child's immune system healthy enough to handle vaccines? And what we know is a baby and a young infant's immune system is terribly powerful. And what does a vaccine do? A vaccine creates a memory of an illness your child has never had, so that when it comes calling, you can say, well, no, I already did that, thank you. That's what a vaccine does. And during the first year of life, for instance, live virus vaccines, which have a weakened but live virus in them, are not given to children. In that first year, the vaccines that they're getting are oftentimes what we call split cell vaccines, where they don't jar the immune system so deeply that you get big bad side effects. Many of the alternative vaccine schedules are bashing vaccines we haven't used in 15 or 20 years or more. But that's how they gain the support of people who are anxious about vaccines.
What are the risks with the alternative schedules? Because I'm hearing a lot of parents say, no, I am vaccinating my children just on a different schedule. Is that the same?
Well, one of the risks is people who won't take a combination product, which the FDA won't approve something until we prove it's not only as strong but as long lasting as given separately. So one of the risks is, to me, if something can be given in one injection that would ordinarily have been 3 shots, it's a little mean to give 3 needle injections when one would have done perfectly. So there's a little resistance to combination and a lot of mythology about combinations not being good vaccines. We don't license them till we know that they are. Some of the other fears are side effects of vaccines. 4 or 5 years ago, there was a controversy where over in Great Britain they thought there was a connection between measles vaccine and autism. There never was. And the person who proposed that was a criminal. His medical license was taken away and he was briefly imprisoned. But he sort of poisoned two sides of the Atlantic Ocean into thinking that vaccines, aren't going to be as safe as we thought they were. The biggest consequence of delaying vaccination is getting the disease it protects against. So, for instance, I see a fifth of the earaches I saw 5 years ago. So, Prevnar, vaccine stopping pneumonia and ear infections, is terribly effective. In Minnesota and in Pennsylvania, winter before last, unvaccinated 6-month-olds died of meningitis that left this community in 1984 because I was here. And twice a month I would see a case of meningitis that could take your life. We were very fortunate. We had great survival rate. It could make you deaf or intellectually impaired or kill you. 2 children in the East Coast of the United States that winter died because their parents made an incorrect choice to delay that vaccine. And yet I oftentimes talk with people who don't want to hear these details. They think, oh, well, I just can't listen to that. It's too stressful. Well, yes, it's stressful to lose your child, but had that child been able to speak for herself, she would have said, Mommy, Daddy, I'd like to have that vaccine, please, and it is safe. So illnesses that we've thought we conquered are coming back. The newsworthy most recent example is measles vaccine coming out of Disney World or Disneyland in California, and those cases spread all over the country from vaccine children unprotected against that. So that's the side of it, and what I hope most parents will begin to believe is that their physician or their pediatrician, so family practitioner or pediatrician, is there to be your advocate and to help you learn what would your child tell you if they could speak for themselves.
Let me ask you this, because there are a couple of things that parents have said that I'm not a doctor, so I don't have an answer to for them, but I told them I would run it by the next doctor I talked to. One said, I know what's best for my child.
Well, I'd like to see the MD degree that goes with that or the public health degree that goes with that. I think this culture in the United States promotes everybody having a sense of their own expertise in things that they may not necessarily have studied but have heard about.
Okay. What about for parents of special needs children? It appears to be really prevalent within their community that there's something maybe with my child's genes,
Right.
like I just don't really trust it.
Right.
And amongst their community, there are a lot of parents who decide that maybe they want to get off schedule. They're saying they have seen their children have bad reactions to vaccines, and that makes them not want to vaccinate perhaps the next child that comes along. What do you say to those parents?
We've not seen, if you will, scientific evidence that vaccines cause any regression in milestones or developmental abilities. We know that children who have, for instance, genetic problems can be properly vaccinated, so their immune systems rarely are going to be, and those who have problems that would hurt your immune system know about it. Those are very, very rare situations.
So a doctor would have already kind of let them know that.
Yes,
this
that we
is the
should.
case.
And in a child who's just finished chemotherapy for a cancer, there may be several years where they can't receive certain vaccines. And again, it's the hematologists, oncologists, subspecialists who tell us, no, you mustn't. But then there are other vaccines that they need and they get routinely and do fine.
Are they putting other children at risk?
Yes, and this is the thing. There's sort of this sense that if other people's children are vaccinated, my child's immune system must be, way more special than my neighbor's. So therefore, we could just not. That doesn't appeal to me very much because I think that's not true. I think everybody's of value. And so with anytime a vaccination rate falls below about 92%, and in some states we're getting really close to that borderline, the illnesses that we're trying to protect against can get a foothold and can return, and we are seeing that.
And if things continue with what you're seeing now, do you think we'll cross that threshold?
I don't think so, because I think, again, some of these sentinel flare-ups of old-timey illnesses has actually it maybe ignited some interest among parents to rethink, are my fears and are these possible myths really not as true as we thought they were? So in some ways, it's kind of energized some of my borderline families to say, well, what else? That worked pretty well. What else do you have to offer? And oftentimes we're seeing a fair number of people get back on track recently. I hope we won't go below that, because then we're going back in time. And one other thing I've heard from One dad, not too long ago, he said, I don't want my child to get any vaccine that I didn't get. And I'm sorry to say this, inside of me, I couldn't say this in a professional way. I wanted to say, so are you against airbags? Don't like progress? What's the deal there? And so the idea that we would have to have a certain cutoff point beyond which we are not allowed to introduce new and more helpful vaccines, that doesn't appeal at all to most people.
So ultimately, is it about this communication? We've talked about this a lot, that both sides sort of need to be
Right.
open. What would you
Right.
say is the number one thing that needs to happen to sort of get most of these parents back
Yes.
on track? Because this is a really divisive issue.
And it should be all about communication, I believe. And it's sort of sad that I think doctors need to learn to listen better, for sure. And when we show a family that we are listening, sometimes that begins to open up their minds to, well, is that a valid source of advice beyond what I read on the internet?
But there are some parents who they trust their doctors, but then they say they don't feel their doctor should have the right to not see their child because of this decision.
No, because when you bring a child into, let's say, above 6 months of age, I would guess is when maybe babies are beginning to get down on the floor and move around. When you bring a child into your waiting room who may be under-vaccinated, they do pose a risk to those children who have done the right thing and gotten their vaccines in a decent order.
Can you explain how?
Through contagious illness. Most of the illnesses we're vaccinating against are respiratory illnesses. So that a child who might become a passer along of those illnesses maybe, can't go there. And that's, like I said, that's that parent's individual choice. And it's also the physician's choice to say, this is what I want for my practice. So I respect anybody who makes those particular rules. They're making their way a lot simpler and don't have to spend quite as much time teaching, but fine. They're also giving excellent quality care because they're following recommended guidelines. So,
Are you good? Who should not be vaccinated, or parents of which type of children should be considering maybe deviating from the regular schedule?
Most of the children who have concerns that should not receive the regular vaccination schedule will usually know about that based on their child's disease, whether it's recovering from chemotherapy, after a cancer when your immune system is beaten down, obviously HIV, immune suppressed people with inherited immune system problems, and they're rare. Those are the folks who will have specialists or physicians helping them make that decision. Many children with genetic problems can be vaccinated perfectly easily, although it might be tempting to think we should be careful about that. I mean, our vaccines that we approve are safe for just about everybody.
So parents are thinking, well, my oldest child, one mom said, my
Right.
son went into shock with a flu vaccine in 7th grade. That makes me just really nervous about moving forward
Right.
with vaccinations for my next kid.
Right, exactly.
And they don't fit necessarily into that category. They should still move forward, in your opinion.
The key there is to find out more about what that vaccine's potential for side effects are, and then make a good choice based on that. And then some people, for things that are optional, some people may skirt a vaccine just because they're anxious about it, and they have to make that decision for themselves.
And to a parent who fits into that category,
Right.
where it just makes them nervous.
Right. But the idea that you might rely on the people around you being protected against something, which we call herd immunity, the idea that rationalizes your stepping back from, if you will, your responsibility to vaccinate your child is a little bit silly, I think, because that doesn't make sense, because that puts us to sometimes that risk that you're going to get to where these illnesses will return. If enough people think like you, one of the alternative vaccine schedule books recommends that those who are avoiding vaccination shouldn't tell their friends, so that their friends will be getting vaccines, and their child, who's obviously much more special than the other child, is going to be protected, but by people around them that aren't aware that you're missing those vaccines. That's sort of sad to not value every child, because this is something we've proven is not. It's an effect in vaccinations. The more people are vaccinated, the less we see illnesses, particularly true in college students. But to think that you shouldn't be part of the process of, if your child is healthy, being vaccinated, that's very sad.
Can I get some 2 shots?